This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female.
Always left, always with me. Always left, always with me.
Tanse, hello, and welcome back to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Olet Stonechild, and I'm very excited and honored to have this conversation with Jessica Matten here with me today. She is an actress, a producer, and an all-around badass. She is Red River Metis-Cree descent from Edmonton, Alberta, and you may have seen her in a few shows such as APTN's Tribal, also Discovery Canada and Netflix's TV show Frontier, starring Jason Momoa, and also the CW Network and CBC drama called The Burden of Truth. Not only is she an actress, she's also a producer, and she runs an Indigenous wellness and fitness company with her family called Lemon Cree, where they have helped thousands of Indigenous people achieve their fitness, wellness, and health goals. You will find out in this episode that me and Jessica have a lot of parallels when it comes to our lives. And it turns out that our moms actually used to work together. They were friends back in the 90s. They had like a modeling company together. And it's so interesting and bittersweet to see Jessica's journey and really her dedication to expanding her physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health on a global scale. And so I hope you're inspired just as much as I was by her story and her journey. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hi, have a blessed day, y'all. I'm very excited and honored to have Jessica here with me today. Jessica, thank you so much for joining. I feel like I'm so surprised our paths haven't crossed in person yet because I've known your work for almost a decade now. And so I'm glad that we're both meeting each other virtually here today.
Yeah, I'm shocked too because we have so many mutual friends in common and Indian country's small, but you know what? We're here and I'm happy to be doing this with you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and if you just want to introduce yourself to the audience, where you're from, a little bit about what you do today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm Jessica Matten. I'm an actress and a producer, and I also have been running a nonprofit called Lemon Cree with my mother for going on 11 to 12 years now. We teach in the most isolated Native reserves across Canada. And yeah, I was born in Edmonton, raised on tons of different reserves, but I wasn't born actually in a reserve. So I have quite a very interesting history with that. But my family is Red River Metis and so too Cree from Winnipeg. And we have family in Peguis First Nation out there as well.
The more you talk and share your story, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, we have so many parallels. It's kind of like interesting
Really?
and kind of creepy at the same time because I'm Red River Métis and I'm Plains Cree.
What?
Yeah, and I
No
grew
way.
up in Medicine Hat, Alberta. I didn't grow up on the res. And I've also
Oh
been
my
running a
God.
nonprofit with my mom since I was 16. So I don't know what
What?
that means. Yeah. I don't know what
Wow.
that means. I'm like, what is your horoscope sign? When were you born?
November, it's coming up actually. Scorpio.
Oh, okay. Oh my
Tell me
gosh,
you're a
we're both
Scorpio too.
I'm a Pisces. We're both water signs,
Okay,
so
okay.
oh my gosh.
Wow.
That's
Wow. Well, hello,
yeah.
twin.
Literally, I'm like that. Oh wow, you learned something new. That's so funny. I get along great with Scorpios, so I'm glad to see another Red River Métis-Cree Scorpio in the house.
Hey, that's amazing. You know what? It's cool hearing that we have such parallel stories because if anything, it's I don't know about you, but growing up, I think there's always been questions about a sense of belonging. And even though I always
Mm,
felt that, sometimes I know with other communities there was always a feeling of where do I fit in because I moved around quite a bit.
mm-hmm.
So it's just really nice to hear that, I'm realizing more and more as time goes on, like the good thing is that in some ways we're not unique in, the way we're
Mm-hmm.
raised. Yeah. So it's so cool. So I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, I feel like it gives you too like a different lens. Like I know that feeling of like obviously being the only native person in the room, but I also know that feeling of like longing for home. Like I've always now that I know that I'm from like Saskatchewan, like my reserve is there, it almost feels like more nourishing to my soul than like Alberta was. And so yeah, it's weird to like feel like almost displaced within your own, like, where you grew up, but also at the same time, that's your home. It's like a weird, I don't know if there's a word. It's like two things that don't go together, but it's cool to know that you have maybe a similar or completely different upbringing. I'm curious to know, like, did you grow up in Edmonton? You said that you moved around a lot. I'm curious to know more about your childhood and how that looked.
Yeah, I actually lived in about 26 different homes before the age of 21. So I moved around quite a bit. So all of Canada really feels um, like home to me. There's
Mm,
not one place, and I think, it's not that I had. I think about friends that I have who've had way more traumatic upbringings than I did. In a lot of ways, I feel, despite the odds and despite the obstacles, I was given opportunities that I'm hyper aware that, my other family members and my other friends perhaps weren't given. And that
mm,
being that my mother, she started the first First Nations modeling agency back in the late 80s, early 90s called Mystique Models. And at the time, it wasn't so much about women being beautiful and skinny and learning to walk the catwalk, but it was actually acting as also a shelter for women experiencing domestic abuse. And so
mm,
as a child, I literally was raised around aunties coming in, and it wasn't anything new to see, women who had like bruises on their body or face, but
mm,
taking these modeling courses, it was very fascinating. Like the more I think about it, like as an adult, and I reflect back, but because that's all I knew growing up, I ended up as a teenager kind of taking on what my mother was doing, and I would steal a bunch of magazines from 7-Eleven, the gas station grocery store, and I would make
yeah.
these vision boards out of $1 poster boards, and I would gather girls my age around. And this was before the whole manifestation thing, before that was a thing, but I just knew that it felt
Mhm,
good to bring girls my age together. And I knew what they were going through at home. And I just, even at like 14, 15 years old, I wanted to uplift the girls in my life. And because I knew at the time I
mm,
needed that as well. And again, going back to it, it's all I knew growing up with my mom and seeing. And so it's something I carry on in my life to this day. And it's very important for me to whenever I have an opportunity or chance, I'm constantly trying to uplift other women in my life because I've relied so
mm,
heavily in my life for women to uplift me too. So it's yeah, I just really value women standing up for one another, and I've been very fortunate where I've never had kind of like I've never dealt with that kind of mean girl thing ever in my life, and I think
right.
you are what you attract, if that's a saying,
Mhm,
which is I've
yeah,
always wanted to make sure that I was supportive of what people were going through, so people were always supportive back, and yeah, so that's
mm.
I'm kind of rambling here, but
Th
that's
No,
you know
I could honestly listen because, like, it's we already have come to the conclusion that we have so many parallels, but my mom actually had a performing arts company when I was growing up, and so I
wow.
too witnessed her, helping out the community, helping out Indigenous youth, and, my mom, was a single parent, but also my dad, she had a relationship with my father, and so I kinda grew up with the same kind of perspective of, I see the power that happens when we come together, especially as Indigenous people, and we come together and we create magic, or we create healing through movement or through dance or through our voices. And so I was also like very attuned because of my mom, and so I followed too in her footsteps. And so it's so inspiring to know that literally matriarchs and women and our mothers and our grandmothers are we're literally paving the way for us. And so I'm curious to know, the word matriarchy, when you think of it, what does the word matriarchy mean to you? And are there matriarchs that you're currently inspired by?
I love that because you're making me think about the term. Because to be honest,
Mm,
I've never really applied the term to my life. Um, I
mhm,
find it's always just been a way of being. And so to be honest, I've never really investigated what that term would look like on paper for my life, but all I could say is that I know I've been living it, that's for sure, and that is,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just a matter of, we were given these female bodies, and I've never. It's weird. I've never really seen myself as, I'm a woman, therefore I have to accomplish and do this and that and that, and I have to behave a certain way. I've kind of always been so highly aware of what it means to be a woman in society that I've kind of always went the other way, if that makes sense, of I'm not going to
Yeah,
fit
yeah,
into
yeah.
this stereotype of, you know, the things I have to do. And I know on paper it may seem so. I ended up in an industry of, entertainment where looks and all that stuff could sometimes there could be quite the emphasis placed on that. But in my personal life and the work I do outside of acting, and even in acting, it's always been very much about just being a woman who supports others, and it doesn't matter what gender. And just when people ask for help, or sometimes even when they don't, but I know they need it, to be the first one to stand in front of the line and offer that support. Yeah, to be honest, with labels, I think because I was raised in a generation where I was raised to just accept everyone as equals. It didn't matter, what their
Mm-hmm.
sexual orientation, their culture, their background. I've just been exposed to so much as a child at such a young age that I really view everyone as equal, and I tend to see just spirit, which is I think a good way to
Yeah, yeah,
be.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I love that you put like it's not necessarily like a definition or, a word, but it's really comes through a sense of embodiment and, acting and helping others. And I also love that you brought up, even this binary way of thinking of like, what does it even mean to be a woman now today? Like, what does like that term is so confined, I believe, historically and even presently. And I love that you also bring up the entertainment industry because for me, that was really a big pull as to why I kind of shifted into the health and wellness world was because I felt, very, obviously judged on my physical appearance, obviously judged on my acting. You're just constantly being, put through a microscope. And so I'm curious to know how has your acting journey been and what keeps you rooted to your own authenticity and to your own power?
Ooh, these are good questions, Shayla. um, I think because I've been able to keep a very grounded sense of self in the film industry, because I decided when I got into it to actually not place emphasis on the stereotypical things that, in particular, as women, that we should. And I was put into martial arts competitively at a very young age, and so sports had always been a part of my life. And I realized, okay, in the film industry, that actually really came in handy. And people always ask my sexual orientation too, and I actually
Mm.
find it a compliment. Because of a certain way that I act or how they perceive me to be. Men and women or whatnot, always are, for some reason, they're curious and they're trying to put me in a box too. And I like to stay out of all of it, if that makes sense. I like to
Yeah.
stay at and I think a part of how my brain works is very out of the box anyways.
Mm.
So what your question was, I guess, just like, how do I stay grounded in the industry, remain rooted?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I think the key in any industry is to know what your purpose is.
Mm.
And if you don't have a sense of purpose, that's okay too. But my purpose comes from a place of wanting to help others. And that doesn't necessarily mean with end results of, like, say, me winning an acting award or anything like that. No, it's actually quite the reverse. It's the work that happens behind the scenes. I'll give you an example. Right now, I'm producing and directing a film, and I'm making sure that I brought on a team of Indigenous women crew members from all walks of life, Hispanic, Native. I actually hired on the first and the only IATSE unionized makeup artist who is Native
Oh, wow.
in all of the United States. So there's a lot of ways that I like to uplift other people in this industry, and that gives me a sense of purpose, because if I'm helping to facilitate someone else's dreams, I mean, there's nothing else, and I swear, hands down, there's nothing else better on this planet than being able to help someone else facilitate their dreams. And I use the acting industry as such. I know that it's a pathway for people to know that I exist, to hear what I have to say, and to help me gather the resources and the tools and the connections that I need to be able to continue to help the people in our community.
That's great. Because yeah, I feel like as you evolve, like as a person, like I feel like that's kind of my end goal too. It's like, yes, individual success and individual, using your voice on a individual scope is so important. But really, if you can share, that table or that spot with others, I feel like that's the dream. That's the end goal for me as well. And I'm curious to know like how you got to, because I know all actors have their like protocols and their like rituals and their routines to really get them into a character. And so I'm curious to know a little bit about, what happens to you when you're getting prepped for a new role. What do you have to go through to get to that level of consciousness for that character?
For me, it's to prep for a role is definitely a combination of mind, body, spirit. So even when I'm not working and I don't know where my next job is coming from, I'm constantly working on that mind, body, spirit connection. So I always say like I train physically at the gym as though I'm preparing for that next role. So when the time comes, I'm already ready to go. I'm a ready product. And as much as it is physical, the gym for me really is, that's my outlet. That's what keeps me even keel. And that's what also provides me the clarity and focus and the mental discipline that I need when I need to be memorizing tons of pages. And the last TV show I did, Tribal, I was memorizing 18 pages a day, which is unheard of. To put in perspective for those that don't know, a maximum amount of pages that you would be filming in a day is 6. So I literally was doing more than double. I was doing triple, which meant I was getting 4 hours of sleep at night. And I had within those 4 hours to memorize 18 pages for the next day. Yeah. And this is because they were on quite a tight budget. And I did that for 4 months straight. So in order to prepare for that, we were going to the second season, and I remember it being like that in the first season. So I had a whole year, and it was interesting during the pandemic. I think we all went through the lulls and the ups and downs, but I had to find that inner strength to pull it together and really discipline my body in a new way, because I knew if I disciplined my body, my mind was going to follow through all the hard times ahead. So I would say it's more so that. And in terms of like the character itself, I rely heavily on intuition, to be honest. If a script is well written, you will feel the character. You will understand what the writer is trying to achieve. You will get the essence and the spirit of that character. And it really helps to observe other human beings, to travel, to experience other cultures, because you'll find all these wonderful nuances that people possess in different parts of the world if you're really paying attention. And so I take little parts of that from people I've met over the years, and I just apply it. So that's my process overall. And then there really is no magic. I get down and dirty and study for hours on end. There's nothing glamorous about it whatsoever.
Well, yeah, there's like a lot that happens behind the scenes that's obviously not shown on camera, but I imagine like even your experience through childhood and moving around a lot and witnessing like people then, even as a kid. I mean, you're exposed to so many different kind of nuances, which is cool to see that now you can even use that in your work today. And speaking of your work today, I know that you've acted in Tribal, you've acted in with one of my favorites, Jason Momoa. I know that people are probably waiting for him to be brought up. The Burden of Truth. You've also acted in Frontier. And so I'm curious to know, like, for you personally, what are maybe some of the highlights and one of the challenges throughout your journey this far?
Definitely the highlights are always the friendships I make along the way, whether that's with the crew or the cast. Yes, Momoa, he's a brother for life now. And it's very interesting. When we were filming Frontier, I was watching him and how he was filming his other projects at the same time. And I'm actually taking a lot of note of that. And it's funny how he always says I'm his little sister, like the little brat version of him. And I realize that I'm beginning to apply all the things that I observed him do. And I feel very fortunate that I was able to watch someone who's gotten to where he is today. And like, I've literally observed and witnessed that journey and what that's like. And, it just kind of expanded, even like my own limitations that I perhaps maybe placed in my head on myself. And I'm like, and then, and I have him he just, the last time we saw each other, I think it was in the spring, and he's like, well, just do it. I was like, but what do you mean? He's like, just do it. Like, no excuse, And so, and I like friends like that who remind me, because I remind my friends all the time too. Just do it. Just try it out. Like, what's the worst that could happen? Someone says no, or someone doesn't respond at all. You got to learn to never take these things personally. And, just understand that, we communicate and we perceive information and we take in information very differently. So you can never take anything personal. So the best thing you could do for yourself is be your biggest cheerleader and just try it. Say yes. Stop picking up the phone and going to your friends and being like, oh, I want to do this, but I can't for blah, blah, blah number of reasons. Yes, you can. Now you're just making excuses, right? And you're wasting your friend's time. So I always think, that's something that I'm always making sure I do. So I would say that has been like the biggest bonus out of everything I filmed. For the hard times, it's not a glamorous job like people think. We work long hours, work 12 to 14-hour days. You go home and you're studying. You don't really have time to live this rock star life when you're working. You have to be extremely disciplined and diligent if you want to do a good job. And I always feel responsible to not just myself, but to the entire cast, the crew, and of course the people that hired me, right? To be like, okay, I got to prove to them why they hired the right person. And I take my work very seriously, and I love what I do. But even physically, I do most of my own stunts on every single show, and I've ended up in the emergency quite a few times. I'm not going to lie. So, I have yet to come off of a show where I haven't had bruises and scratches on my leg. I think Burden of Truth actually was the only show, because it was more of like a court procedural where I didn't come out banged up. But yeah, I feel honestly the hardest challenge to be quite frank is in your personal life. I have been living out of my suitcase for 6 years. And I think it's a part of the job that people don't talk a lot about. There's a big sacrifice, your dating life. How do you make that work all the time with a partner when you're literally living in another country or city for 6 months out of the year? There's not a lot of people who are down for that. I've missed funerals, I've missed weddings, I've missed birthdays of the people I love the most in my life because of this career. So I always want to remind people of that too. It's I know what it looks like on the outside. You walk the red carpet for 5 minutes, you're in high stress. But that is 5 minutes of the grand scheme of things. And I think with any career choice, with anything you do in life, you can make anything happen, but there's going to be sacrifices. That is the yin and yang of life in general. Yeah.
And like outweighing, do the pros like outweigh the cons? And so constantly looking for that balance. And I love that, you know, at the beginning of this, when you were talking about your success and your highlights, you said that you didn't even know what was possible outside of your own limited perception. And I think that of that often because as Indigenous people, you know, we grew up in a city, but if you were living on a reserve, you don't even know the realities that exist outside of that reserve. So how can you dream big if you haven't even like existed in another like reality that is out there, you know? And so I think of that
Yes.
often as like we don't even know what's possible because we've never really seen it. And so now I feel like for once I'm really, you know, I feel like there's a change happening within consciousness, especially within Canada right now, of people waking up to the realities that Indigenous people have always known. And it's, you know, the history that Canada and the world has been built upon. And so I'm hoping to see like a shift happen not only with Indigenous people and our own worldviews and how we can shift from a state of survival into a state of creation, but also like how can Canadians and non-Indigenous people support our evolution and our own like getting out of our own limitations that were brought on by, you know, the federal institution and by the whole history here in Canada. So those are thoughts that I also think of often. And I'm curious to know, like, would you have any advice for, you know, maybe in the acting industry or even just in general for non-Indigenous people supporting our rise as Indigenous people and artists and actors?
You touched on so many points and I'm like, are we the same person? 'Cause, I just wanted to say one thing that I've been doing before the entire movement within the communities is getting our people well. And like you said, how if people have never left a reserve, how do they know what else is out there? And it's interesting because that's one thing I always say when non-native people come up to me at a bar or somewhere down the street in Canada and they go, well, if the reserve is so bad, why don't they just leave? And I always say, how do you know it's better if you never experienced better before and what that looks like? And I said, just
Mm,
think about that
mm,
rationally. And yet they still don't get it because I almost feel like it should become a mandate that every Canadian spends time on a reserve. And I
mm-hmm,
mean, some of the most isolated ones too, so that they really have an understanding of how limited resources are, why there's 10 people living to one trailer, a two-bedroom trailer up
mm-hmm.
there, because the prices of even getting lumber up to these communities is ridiculous. I went up to communities where I saw a bell pepper for $19. $19 for one
Yeah.
bell pepper. I've seen an
Insane.
apple for 25 bucks, you know, and this is in Canada. So, I bless people that want to donate to Africa and all that stuff. But I always said, and I always will, is you don't have to go to other continents to help people when we have third world conditions in our country and have always. I was
Mm-hmm.
part of a program of actually buying back water filtration buckets from Africa so that we could
Mm,
get them back in North America so that our native communities have clean drinking water. It's insane.
mm-hmm,
It's insane that I even have to
mm-hmm,
source that stuff. So that's one part. And I get, like you, very passionate about it. But going on with, the truth and reconciliation happening within Canada, it's interesting because I feel with the awareness happening with the residential schools finally coming to light, people are starting to really, really take it seriously this time. When the TRC Act came out a few years ago, it kind of felt like it had fallen to the wayside, and it's sad and also needed that it took the unraveling of all these gravestones for people to really um, act on the TRC Act now, if that makes sense.
mm-hmm.
I notice a difference. I'm part of the generation because my mom was one of the first people to start the initial inquiries into missing and murdered Indigenous women with attorney Bev Jacobs, Mohawk lawyer, about 20 years ago now. I've actually been privy to quite a bit of knowledge that most people haven't. And so it's been 20 years of my knowing. And I remember when I had access to this information and I was reaching out to people, people didn't really care. So sometimes it's hard, and my family member was murdered by a serial killer.
Mm.
And so I am a family member of one of the victims of MMIW as well. And my cousins are still, to this day looking and seeking justice. So, it hits home. It really hits
Totally.
home. And there's a part of me that when this all came out, I was like, is it sincere? Do people actually care this time around? Or is it just the next trendy hashtag? You know what I mean? Like, and I'm just being brutally honest. So I have mixed feelings about it. I'm super grateful. But with all that being said, you were asking how can we hear this quite often now? How can non-Indigenous and Indigenous, how can we all gather together to support one another, to be allies? And I wish I could say the cliche things, read books,
Yeah.
do your homework,
Yeah.
Google it. But the reality is I'm not responsible to fully get an individual interested in caring about their neighbors. And I think that's something and I in other interviews I've taken a very, cliche, more positive spin on it. But if I'm being very, very sincere, Shayla, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I could say these things, other people could say these things, but is it just also becoming a cliche in itself to say, let's just support one another. Let's be part of the awareness. But so what does change actually look like? And I think about, okay, so 20 years ago when I knew all this stuff was happening, what was I doing with my life? I decided I was going to continue to break the cycles within my own family. I was going to stay away from alcohol. I wasn't going to sell drugs. Even if sometimes I really needed money and I saw my cousins making a lot of good money, doing it, I would think about, okay, what is the short-term sacrifice I have to make here to be good, for my heart to be happier, to be more proud of myself at the end of the day? How do I help my community become more proud of their neighbors as well, of their culture? And I realize it really begins with the individual. So, I'm so passionate about this topic. I could go on and on and on. But at the end of the day, it's about you only have power to change yourself and to be a part of that change. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I often hate asking those questions too, because I know how it feels to have to, constantly be asked them. And it is kind of like it gets very repetitive sometimes. You say the same things. You're like,
It is important though.
it is important. And at the same time, it is kind of like this has been going on for so long. It's kind of like you reach a level of exhaustion because it's about a relationship, it's about creating that kinship. And if it's only one side, if it's only on Indigenous people's shoulders constantly, then it's like you do hit a plateau of being like, wiped out or drained. And so I love that you bring it back to like, how can I heal myself intergenerationally and how can I use my gifts to help the collective? And I think that's kind of the shift that I honestly have to do on a day-to-day basis, or else you just feel overwhelmed by like the state of the world and the state of like our nations here in Canada. But I also have a lot of hope for the future, and I think we see it online now, and we see it in our communities. There's so many Indigenous people, healing and rising and demanding that our voices be heard. And as much as it is like shocking to the system, it's also like it's a catalyst. I feel like right now we're in a catalyst, but there's also like you have to go through the dismantling of what once was and the destruction of like these old paradigms and systems. And I know we talked about horoscopes before, but we're in the age of Aquarius, which is like the age of information. And so I think right now it's like all the information is coming up. And so hopefully people utilize this information and use that for the greater good. And I know we have listeners on here that a lot of them are Indigenous women and Indigenous youth. And so I'm curious to know, like, what would your advice be for the younger generation if they are feeling, overwhelmed or lethargic or maybe uninspired? What would your advice to the younger generation be?
I would say, I'm given this wonderful platform as an actor, but the reality is that it's just a title. It's one of the many careers out there. And so I just want to say to whoever's listening to this, your role in society is just as equally as important. Just because you're not in the limelight of things, so to speak. Even if you have 50 followers on social media, you owe it to yourself, most of all, to be good to yourself. One thing I love that you said is that every day you're working on yourself, and every day I'm working on myself. And I think that's key is doing the internal work, the internal healing, because you are part of the change when you decide to heal yourself, and when you decide to love yourself. And self-love is something that I've had to work very hard on in, my 20s in particular. And when you do that work, you really are able to have a different perspective and outlook in life, and it will make you stronger. It will, when you're listening to all this political stuff happening in the world and you feel flustered or overwhelmed or angry, when you do that work on yourself, it's going to change your perspective on things in a very healthy way, meaning you're not going to hold grudges as much. You're not going to let small things get to you. You're going to be able to see the bigger picture because your mind is in a calmer place. You're more grounded.
Totally.
And things that you see are affecting other people and they're getting riled up about, it will be dust off of your shoulder. And I think that's key. So I go back to training the mind, body, and spirit. And this is why I'm a big advocate of working out and working on your fitness, because you start working out, you're going to be motivated to eat better. What you put into your body 100% matters because it affects your mental state. And you got to remember food, we have allergies to food and food intolerances that turn out if you feel depressed or down after you put something in your body, that's actually you having an allergic reaction to it. So I think about this, I love chocolate and all that stuff, but little examples of what I do. I make sure I eat chocolate with 1 gram of sugar in it and stuff like that.
Right,
and you will adjust.
right.
It tastes like meh at first, but all of this goes back to your question of what can the youth do? What can the listeners do to stay strong through all this? And like I said, it's all connected. So if you could do those things for yourself on a daily basis, I think that's the key. That's the key.
Yeah.
We're all in the storm together. So yeah.
I think also being gentle with yourself too is so important, especially during the pandemic. I know none of us were really prepared for the last couple years. It's been quite a number on the nervous system as well. But I mean, more reason to dive into those routines and those daily rituals. And I'm curious to know, what are you diving into for the next of 2021?
In terms of fitness or just things in general?
Things in general. Or both. What does the rest of your year look like?
Yeah, well, right now I'm in the middle of filming the lead on a new TV show in Santa Fe. It's being produced by George R. Martin and Robert Redford and Chris Eyre, called Dark Winds, with Zahn, McClarnon and Kiowa Gordon. So I'm just in the middle of filming that, and at the same time I'm producing a film. And again, uplifting other Indigenous people and the crew out here, just by giving them opportunities to help them shine as well. It's very important to me that I help to facilitate other people's dreams, and so that's what I'm doing. And even with the COVID things, I'm going to schedule to work in some Native reserves. I hold safety workshops for young girls and women, so it's about building their self-esteem. Also practical movements that they could use. So if, for example, they were in a vulnerable position of potentially being raped, that they know how to break out of that. So those are the what I'm doing for the rest of the year. I'm going to be finishing this TV show and then post-editing the film, and then hopefully take off back to my my haunt in Paris, where I just like to
Awesome.
write and kind of be with myself. Yeah.
Sweet. You have a spot in Paris?
Yeah, I'm quite the loner. Like I travel the world alone, and then I always make these friends abroad.
Yeah.
So I'm just I keep to myself, but yet I end up meeting and getting myself in trouble with a bunch of new friends. So that's what I'm looking forward to. But mostly it's just focusing on all the stuff I want to produce next year too. So that's definitely more the direction I'm moving into is producing. So
Sweet.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we're coming up at the end, but I'm curious to know, how has that transition been from like going from acting to producing? Do you see yourself producing more in the long term, or are you still going to do both simultaneously?
Yeah, I see that my heart is more fulfilled with producing. I
Mm,
came into the acting business later on in life, and I never thought I would be an actor. I mean, I worked in advertising in London, England, and land development in Hong Kong, even for a bit. So life is pretty bizarre and interesting. But I find I work best, and my heart is most fulfilled when I'm part of the behind the scenes collaborative process, and I really love the
mm,
business aspect of it. So yeah, I want to get involved more with like directing. I'm directing my first episode of a TV series next year, and I want to. I'm in talks to executive produce a TV show as well, and I'm not planning to act in that one. I don't want to, and plus I'm tied to the show too. So I like to focus on the acting job at hand. I also don't believe in being greedy and spreading yourself too thin.
mhm.
But these are pursuits that I do want to continue to pursue for the long haul. So, yeah, producing has been quite for me. It's the work is hard, but I love it. And I find I've been fortunate to bounce from TV show to TV show as a series regular that I've learned the ins and outs of what it takes to operate an entire production. And on Tribal, I was a producer on that too. So I literally was working behind the scenes as well as in front of the camera, and I just realized, oh, I really like this. It's a lot of work, but I really like it. I got more gray hairs, but uh, it's uh, it's like I said, I would love to be able to facilitate to give other actors opportunities to pursue their dreams in front of the camera, and I'm more than happy to be a part of that for them. So yeah, so that's
Yeah.
the goal.
That's awesome. I look forward to seeing, all the things that you're acting in, but also your journey on being a producer, because that's something that I never even thought of. And then the more I hear about it, the more I'm like, this actually seems like a lot of hard work, but also like very like interesting and entertaining. And like, I don't know, you get to help other people out, which makes the work seem like a lot more valuable in some different ways, I guess you could say. But I look forward to seeing your journey, and I'm curious to know, like, how can people follow your journey and support your journey moving forward?
I'm actually only on one social media platform, Instagram. I find the other ones, I feel like, I don't want to oversaturate
Yeah,
anyone's world. So I just stick on there. And I think
sweet.
that's more than enough for me. And yeah, I have Tribal Season 2 airing on APTN October 21st. So that's coming up. And I'm really Brian and I, my co-star, we were very much a part of the writers' room for that. So we would actually have kind of like a writers' workshop before even filming a scene with our director of cinematography, and so it was very fun to be for season 2 to be a very, very collaborative process, and for
Mm,
us to be able to direct ourselves with Benny, our DP, as well. So we were very hands-on this season, Brian and I, with stuff behind the scenes. And so, yeah, if people want to follow that show, that would be greatly appreciated.
awesome. Well, I'll put it in the show notes. Thank you so much, Jessica, for taking the time. I'm inspired by your journey, and I'm also like still pretty surprised at how much similarities we have. So I look
It's
forward to
awesome.
continuing to follow you, and thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Shayla. And I'm really grateful and happy that we connected. So thank you so much. And it's nice to speak to another sister today.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I would love your feedback. Follow me on Instagram at Shayla0H, at Matriarch.Movement, and don't forget to subscribe on the pod platform of your choice and review and rate where possible. I'll be back in a week. Hi. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you so much for listening to a podcast by The Brand is Female. I'm Ava Hartling, and this episode was produced by our team. Sound engineering by Isabel Morris. Research and production support, Claire Miglionico. Marketing and digital growth, Kayla Gillis. And partnerships, Natalie Hope.